This is the Ag Queen Podcast. This podcast explores the agriculture industry with the movers and shakers of those shaping it. Here's your host, Lorrie Boyer.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show here today. I want to welcome in my guest as well, Corey Rosenbush. He is the president and CEO of the Fertilizer Institute. Corey, thank you so much for joining me on the show here today as we talk about some different things that are going on in the ag industry, and particularly with the Fertilizer Institute. But before we head into that, I want to learn a little bit more about you. So tell me a little bit about yourself, Corey.
Oh, well, thank you, Lorrie. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been with the Fertilizer Institute for 3 years now as the president and CEO. Prior to that, I was with another association here in Washington, D.C. called the Global Cold Chain Alliance for 15 years. It was the industry it was the association that represented the industry for cold storage and refrigerated transportation. So I was kind of on the other side of the supply chain, working with a lot of food companies, CPG manufacturers, et cetera. But before that, I grew up in Texas. My dad was an ag teacher. I grew up in a small rural town southwest of Fort Worth, and studied ag education at A&M, Texas A&M, that is. And had a very active portfolio in FFA. Was the state and national FFA president, and it's just been a real treat to return to agriculture here at TFI.
I am familiar with the Fertilizer Institute through the National Association of Farm Broadcasting, and every year we get a chance to visit with you at different events and things that are going on. But what does the Fertilizer Institute do exactly?
Well, it's always a pleasure when you all come to town. It's one of the highlights of the year to be able to visit with all of the voices of agriculture. So we represent the fertilizer industry here in Washington, D.C., but really all over the globe. So our members, member companies, are fertilizer manufacturers, wholesalers, distributors, and retailers of fertilizer. And we focus on everything from sustainability issues to legislation on Capitol Hill, to regulatory compliance assistance, to business development. We do a number of events where members are able to connect with one another and discuss what's going on in the industry.
Can you talk to me a little bit more about your members? Who are they?
Yeah, great question. So on the manufacturing side, it's all of the large NPK manufacturers. So CF Industries, who is the largest U.S. manufacturer of nitrogen fertilizers. You've got Nutrien, who is the largest potash manufacturer in North America and the world's largest ag retailer. On the phosphate side, you've got companies like Mosaic and Simplot. Of course, they're all vertically integrated, so it's very hard to label them just as a manufacturer, because you take a Simplot, for example, and they manufacture phosphate fertilizers, but they're also a very large ag retailer. And so it's a wide variety of folks. Next year, our TFI board chairman will be Mark Orr, who is the president and CEO of Growmark. So we have a lot of ag retail represented as well. And then, from a distribution side, everything from a company like Gavilon, who will do a lot of imported fertilizer products, all the way down to small specialty fertilizer. And I shouldn't say small, but upstarts. So we have a lot of biostimulant manufacturers, enhanced efficiency fertilizer products as well.
Okay. All right. And then, and maybe this is a given, but the role of the Fertilizer Institute then is to lobby on behalf of that membership.
Absolutely. It is to represent them, which can be quite tricky when you have that diverse of a membership base. It's not always 100% aligned, but we do try to work through a very consensus decision-making model. And, there are some specialty topics that we might get into, for each member segment. But it's a little bit like making sausage sometimes, trying to align on policy priorities. But I'd say 80% of the time, people are pretty aligned with what we need. For example, we're working a lot on critical minerals right now to ensure phosphates and potash are on the critical mineral list, which will help with permitting issues. And so, even though you're a nitrogen manufacturer, at the end of the day, if that helps the fertilizer industry and helps farmers, we all win.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? Critical minerals, what does that mean exactly then?
Yeah, great question. So it is a very specific issue that we're working on right now. It is a hot topic, but I think when we went through the market volatility that we saw over the last 2 years, and we were exposed as an industry to a lot of geopolitical events. So, for example, in the potash world, you have Belarus and Russia who supply or produce about almost half of the world's potash supply. You suddenly start to see vulnerabilities, and it had an impact here on what the farmer is paying for their crop nutrients. And so the focus really was on how do we really build domestic supply? Are there opportunities to ensure resiliency? And one of the topics that came forward, or one of the solutions, I should say, that came forward was to ensure that our domestic potash and phosphate reserves are accessible, and that they can be mined in a way that will allow for additional supply to the U.S. farmer. So right now, the Department of Interior do not list potash and phosphate on that critical mineral list. And so we're trying to get those two minerals added. We believe that they are not only critical to food security in this country, but also to national security. And so you look at the two largest producers of fertilizer in the world, it's Russia and China. And I'm sure your listeners know all of the challenges we have with those nations right now at a much broader level. So that would be the goal. Now, what does it do for an actual manufacturer? It essentially allows for streamlining of the permitting process. And one example, a phosphate manufacturer had recently spent 10 years and $32 million to get a phosphate mine permit. And so when you think about that lead time, when you think about the cost, when you think about the complexity of that permitting process, ultimately, at the end of the day, it means the farmer is going to have to pay more, and it's going to be longer before that supply is available. And this critical mineral designation creates a streamlined process that really forces the government to look at those permits in a much more efficient way.
Okay. Speaking of permits, as I was perusing through your website a little bit, just getting a feel for some of the issues, some more of the current issues, including what you just mentioned. It looks like Waters of the U.S. rule continues to be a thorn in a lot of sides. So what is the Fertilizer Institute's thoughts and feelings on where that's at in the rewrite that just came out?
Yeah, we're very disappointed, not only in the rewrite, but the fact that there was not a public comment period before that rule was released. I mean, at the end of the day, farmers and many of our manufacturers need that certainty. We recently completed an industry trends research project, and the number one issue that members identified that is keeping them up at night is regulatory uncertainty. And WOTUS is just a great example of that back and forth. So it's not as if we're against regulation. We just need a little more certainty around it. And so, we've all challenged EPA to look at the Supreme Court ruling and to hopefully correct some of those misgivings. But even at a mining level, we need clarity around what can and can't be done.
How optimistic are you that they will reevaluate once again here?
That's a good question. Coming into a political cycle, I'm not sure how much reevaluation we will see, but this constant back and forth, it just depends on what happens with the administration. We saw this at the last administration as well. One of the byproducts of phosphate fertilizer production is a product called phosphogypsum. And so it cannot be used in the United States. As you talk about circular economies and the environment, for every ton of MAP or DAP that's produced, you get 5 tons of phosphogypsum. Now, 55 countries around the world will reuse that product in road construction, gypsum board, soil amendments. But our government in the late 80s said, sorry, you cannot use it because it has elements of radioactive material in it. And so EPA reviewed a very detailed risk assessment that we proposed. And in 2020, the previous administration approved a pathway for phosphogypsum to be reused. And that would be a game changer for companies that are spending hundreds of millions of dollars to basically stack this material. If you ever go to Florida and you see a mountain as you're driving, through Orlando or Tampa, those aren't mountains. Those are phosphogypsum stacks. That's how massive these stacks are. So we got that approval, and then 4 months later, a new administration came in and reversed the entire rule. And so we're now back to where we started. So I'm not terribly optimistic in the next 2 years that anything will change there. I think if there's an administration shift, then we may see shifts again. But I just want to reemphasize that it's really that certainty that I think the industry is looking for. When you're talking about hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of capital investment, that constant changing of regulatory policy makes it really difficult to justify those investments.
Wow. Okay. All right, Corey. Another topic here, and this one I'm not as familiar with, so I might need just a little background on it. And that is the Surface Transportation Board's proposed rule on reciprocal switching.
Yeah, so it is a very complex topic. I'll try to be very high level with it as well. I'm not the expert either when it comes to a lot of the rail operations. But as you know, we have just a few Class 1 rail carriers. So Class 1 rail are the large rail carrier, CSX, Union Pacific as an example, that really operate those major railways. You have a number, hundreds of short line railways, but in terms of long haul, those Class 1 rail carriers tend to dominate a specific market. Some would even say monopolize specific markets. And so, I think service really brought a lot of this to the attention of the Surface Transportation Board. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that was kind of the angle that they pursued that would allow a shipper to switch, the cars to another Class 1 carrier along a route that doesn't have options. And so that's basically the ruling in a nutshell, or the proposed rule, I should say, in a nutshell, that would allow for those shippers to apply for a change in rail carrier service if they don't have multiple options.
Okay. All right, Corey. I think I followed that for the most part. And I can see where that is something you would follow, because that's how most of the fertilizer is transported, right?
We are huge rail shippers. We're one of their biggest shippers. As a matter of fact, when you think about potash again, and the fact that we have limited reserves here, 85% of the potash in the United States is imported. Of that import, over 90% comes from Canada, and a lot via the rail. So yes, we need an effective, efficient, competitive rail network to make sure that product can move throughout the United States.
What about shipping via containers, vessel containers, all the things that we're talking about right now, like on the Mississippi River being so low, and ports and dams need updated, locks and dams, needing updated and things like that. Is that a concern for the Fertilizer Institute?
Oh, absolutely. Waterways are a huge way in which fertilizer moves as well. And so as you think about grain that's coming, out of the heartland, so to speak, via the Mississippi River, fertilizers are that backhaul, or if you want to look at it vice versa, you can as well. And so, yeah, the investment in repairing and rehabilitating our locks and dams is very important. As you think about risk, it's probably one of the biggest risks that food production, that growers face in the United States, because if those locks and dams fail, an entire network of crop inputs as well as grain shipments, become challenged. And so those investments are very important. As far as vessels are concerned, obviously a lot of that moves via barge. We don't see a lot of containerized shipment of fertilizer in the United States unless it's specialty product. That may not necessarily be the case overseas. But we do see bulk vessels with a lot of our imported fertilizer product, of course.
Okay. And Corey, just a couple more things here to visit with you about. Any comments, anything on the Farm Bill?
Yeah, well, first of all, we're hopeful we get one introduced soon. We've been spending time with a number of the House Ag Committee members and Senate Ag Committee members as well, and just looking at some of the politics that are at play. We're coming up against a threat of a government shutdown. And, at the end of the day, there's a lot of discussion around an extension of that Farm Bill. We'd like to see it move forward as quickly as possible. We have a few priorities specific to the fertilizer industry that we've been working with our ag policymakers on. One is the critical mineral piece that I've already mentioned. So we've got some legislation introduced that that is a marker that could be included in the Farm Bill. The other is really around our certified crop advisors. So as we talk about all of the ag retailers that are part of the TFI membership, they're the ones that are the trusted advisor to farmers. And a lot of the conservation payments and conservation programs, I should say, that are funded through the Farm Bill have to have an officially designated technical service provider to make those recommendations and access those funds. And that's probably one of the biggest bottlenecks that we see in farmers being able to access some of those conservation funds is access or really the ability of these TSPs to make those recommendations. So what we're proposing in the current Farm Bill, or in the future Farm Bill, I should say, is that our ag retail agronomists, our certified crop advisors and consultants would be designated as technical service providers so that they can help farmers write the nutrient management plans, for example, that would qualify for some of those conservation payments. So those are probably the two biggest priorities. There are a few others that we're working on as it relates to hopefully what will be a 2023 Farm Bill, but I suspect it'll be a 2024 Farm Bill.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing too. I'm glad I asked because that was a topic that I guess I haven't talked a lot about with regard to certified crop advisors. I guess the last thing that I have to mention here today is we've really been monitoring, and it seems like, maybe just 2, 3, maybe 4 months ago, time flies. The big topic was fertilizer prices in general being so high, input costs being so high. We've seen some of those drop. So what are kind of the current trends, and maybe looking into your looking ball, and based on your experience, what might we see for the rest of the year and into next year?
Well, I suppose the good news is if you're a farmer that those prices came down significantly. We saw that curve dip quite a bit going into spring. I think the challenge for an ag retail, for example, is that they would be really facing a lot of volatility, whereby they had to buy a lot of that inventory back in the fall when the prices were at its peak. And then as it begins to decline, you want a soft landing so that you're not having to write off the inventory. And it was a bit of a mixed bag. I talked to some retailers that had to write off massive millions of dollars of inventory when that price dropped. Others were able to kind of maintain some of that pricing stability through prepays and commitments from the fall. I think across the board, though, we saw a significant depletion in inventory. So it almost has become a reset going into the fall. And I think everyone is very bullish about the fall. So a lot of demand and really looking for a busy fall with what a lot of folks will call a more stable market environment. I think even for fertilizer manufacturers, wholesalers, retailers, everyone, we just don't like the volatility, because that's when you really start to expose yourself to risk. Farmers don't like it, nor does the fertilizer industry like it.
Corey, anything else you wanted to mention that I haven't asked about or we haven't talked about?
Well, there's a lot going on in terms of technology and innovation. And so I think we're not your father's fertilizer industry. where you're just manufacturing NP and K. And even a lot of those large manufacturers that are members that we talked about are innovating, and they're looking at the environment and sustainability, and what are those next generation of products to be introduced, whether it's inhibitors or slow release technology or biostimulants. Those are all on our radar for the future, and a big part of what we're working on here at the Fertilizer Institute. At the same time, when you talk to a retailer's pulling their hair out because they've got so many products now flying off the shelf, or phone calls or emails, or let's look at this, or could we do field trials on this, that it's become a challenge to kind of sift through all of those different innovations. And so we're going to try our best to help. And one way is the creation of the biostimulant certification that we announced this summer. And so we're already starting to receive applications that would align a standard around composition, safety, as well as efficacy testing that would give that product a certification or a seal of approval, so to speak. It's not going to say it's going to work. I just want to be clear, which is what every farmer wants to know. But the grower is going to have to work with their retailer and at least create a bit of a funnel to say, okay, here are the products we may want to look at. Here are the ones that are quote unquote snake oil that did not meet that baseline threshold. So that's just one example of how the fertilizer industry is innovating.
And how will those products be selected?
Well, it's an application process. So anybody that's manufacturing a biostimulant will be able to apply to meet that certification standard. We'll have a team of agronomists that will review those applications and then award or present them with that certification.
Gotcha.
And so that's a tool then that retail agronomists and growers can use.
Gotcha. Okay. And then will they have to pay to apply?
There is a fee associated with the application, yes.
Okay. All right. Corey, thank you so much for your time today. Great interview.
Thank you, Lorrie. It was a pleasure.
Once again, Corey Rosenbush, my guest here today, President and CEO of the Fertilizer Institute. All right.